Good morning. I'm Saini, Vice-Chancellor of University of Canberra, and I'm talking to Michelle Grattan. Good morning, Michelle.
Hello, Deep.
Michelle, we had this massive power outage in South Australia, and the federal government was quick to respond to that and make some comments. I just wanted to know what your views on those comments are.
Well, it's turned into a big political issue because the government decided to really take on the state Labor governments over renewable energy. The federal government thinks that they've set targets that are too ambitious in the renewable area. But I think that the Prime Minister did strike a rather unfortunate note. He didn't go out of his way to say, well, I really feel for the South Australians in this situation. He got pretty quickly into the politics, and also the facts are, as we know them from the experts, that what happened in South Australia, the comprehensive blackout, was in fact not anything to do with renewable energy and the high proportion of that in the South Australian system, but rather it was because poles and wires fell over. And so the government did seem to be conflating the two issues, although to be fair to Malcolm Turnbull and Minister Josh Frydenberg, they did say that this incident was the result of things falling over rather than the renewables. But Barnaby Joyce, Deputy Prime Minister, jumped right in and suggested it was due to wind power not working as it should.
So as you know that the Federal Energy Minister, Josh Frydenberg, has asked for a meeting with the state and territory energy ministers, and he wants to talk about the subject. So I assume you have views on what should be on the table and what shouldn't be, for example, particularly whether it is a one-time extreme weather event, or should we ask questions about the mix of different types of energy?
I think that meeting will cover two broad areas. One, it will get a report on what happened in South Australia, but secondly, it will look at wider questions of energy security, and that will involve renewables and the Prime Minister's push to harmonise targets between the national government and the various state governments. They're all over the place. It's an absolute patchwork quilt at the moment. So that will certainly be central to the agenda, but you'd imagine that it would take quite a while to work through these issues, not just one meeting.
Let's talk about another subject that's been hot lately. That's the backpacker tax, and the government seems to have struck a compromise on this with the opposition. What are your views on how the farmers and those who benefit from the backpackers, so-called backpackers coming to work in Australia, how are they going to take this?
The farmers who are looking for seasonal workers were very concerned that this proposed high tax rate would mean that they wouldn't be able to get this labour. Now the backpackers will pay some tax, but not a very high rate, and that should ensure a better supply of labour, together with some other measures that the government is taking, including an advertising campaign abroad to attract working holiday makers. One interesting aspect, of course, of this issue is that the government was responding in part not just to the farmers, but also to its own backbenchers and especially the National Party. And this is the second issue since the election where the government has needed to accommodate backbenchers, and we'll probably see a lot more of that in the months to come. The other issue, of course, was superannuation.
Well, another subject that's been hot in the media, that is the subject of same-sex marriage and the plebiscite on the subject. They have had an unsuccessful meeting with the opposition to strike a balance on this, strike some sort of a compromise. It seems like that there is somewhat of a retreat going on from the plebiscite. What are your views on that?
Well, look, I think this meeting that occurred early in the week was really going through the motions on both sides. I think that the government can't really make any compromises, fundamental compromises to its plebiscite model because, again, its own backbench would not allow it to do that. On Labor's side, Bill Shorten has built up such a strong argument against a plebiscite that for him to retreat now and say, oh, well, we'll support a plebiscite on this or that condition, it would really shock his own troops and alienate a section of the gay community that's arguing very strongly against a plebiscite. So look, I think we are just marking time essentially here with a lot of rhetoric until the vote comes up in a few weeks in the Senate.
Another hot item is how Labour Party seems to have pulled ahead of the Liberals 52 to 48, especially when you look at it as in two-party divide. Mr. Turnbull's own approvals have been falling. What do you think is behind this change? Well,
in a way, it was a surprise poll, and it's a bit hard to really explain it, because Malcolm Turnbull had had a good 2 weeks before that poll. He'd done well in Parliament, and he'd got some wins on the omnibus bill, for example. There'd been an agreement struck, and therefore he had come out of that parliamentary week well, and then he'd gone overseas and his performance got quite good reviews from the travelling media. So you would have expected him at least to hold the 50-50 two-party vote that had been in the previous poll a fortnight earlier. You'd have expected him not to have his personal rating deteriorate further. You sort of wonder whether people have now got a feeling that Malcolm Turnbull's not performing well overall, that he's not delivering enough, or that he's not seeming as though he's the Malcolm Turnbull that we thought we knew. Maybe that perception has become ingrained and it's hard for him to turn it around, even with short-term achievements. If it has, that's pretty dangerous for him in the medium term. But one poll is not the answer, so we have to see how the picture unfolds. But I think that would have caused a bit of grief in the Prime Minister's office this week.
Thank you, Michelle. This is most enlightening. Thank you.
Good to talk to you. Thanks a lot, Deep.